The auction hall turned on her the second 71-year-old Mabel Rourke lifted her buyer card. Not for the biggest bull, not for the champion bull, for the narrow-hipped, scar-faced, dust-colored old bull standing at the back of the ring like he had already survived every bad year the room was too proud to imagine. The tag on the gate read Lot 42. His name was Cinder. The auctioneer barely tried to sell him. The younger ranchers were still buzzing over the glossy black performance bulls that had sold for pickup truck money. The bankers near the rail were still shaking hands with men who believed heavy calves could solve anything. And Travis Hale, owner of Hale Crown Beef, laughed so hard his belt buckle flashed under the lights. "That woman just bought yesterday's cattle," he said. A few men laughed with him. Mabel did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Cinder. Because while everyone else saw age, scars, and an unimpressive frame, Mabel saw one thing nobody in that barn was watching. The bull was not breathing hard. Outside, the New Mexico heat had already climbed above 100 before noon. The big bulls sold earlier had come through the ring blowing foam, shaking their heads, their sides heaving after 2 minutes beneath the metal roof. Cinder stood calm, still, economical, like heat was not an enemy to him, like it was home. That is the detail that changed everything. Because less than 90 days later, the same ranchers laughing inside that auction hall would be staring at empty pregnancy reports, shrinking water tanks, and expensive animals that could not do the one job they were bought to do. And the old woman they mocked would be the only one in the county whose herd was still building a future. Red Lantern Ranch sat on the eastern edge of New Mexico, where the grass did not look green so much as stubborn. The land rolled low and gray beneath saltbush, yucca, and ragged strands of barbed wire. In spring, it could fool strangers into believing there was plenty. By July, it told the truth. Mabel Rourke had lived there for 46 years. She knew how the wind sounded before a dry week. She knew which straws held shade after noon. She knew which cows walked too far for water and which ones quit early. She knew the difference between a ranch that looked successful and a ranch that could survive August. Most of Harding County had already decided Red Lantern was fading. Not officially. No bank sign hung on the gate. No auction notice sat in the newspaper. But people talked about it, the way people talk when they think mercy sounds kinder than truth. After Jonah died, she should have sold. Nolan can't carry that place alone. That old herd is too small to matter now. Mabel heard all of it. She heard it at the feed counter. She heard it after church. She heard it in the pauses when men stopped talking because she walked into the room. But she had spent too many years beside Jonah Rourke to confuse noise with knowledge. Jonah had been a quiet man, not shy, quiet. There is a difference. Shy people are afraid to speak. Quiet people are often listening harder than everyone else. For more than 4 decades, Jonah kept weather books in a cabinet beside the kitchen stove. Not pretty journals, workbooks, mud-stained, coffee-ringed, cracked along the spine. Each one filled with rainfall totals, breeding dates, forage notes, cow weights, calf survival, wind damage, hoof condition, heat recovery, water drawdown, conception failures, and comments in black pencil so blunt they could cut pride. Large frame bulls still panting 2 hours after sunset. Old line cow crossed 7 miles, bred back clean. Night heat worse than day heat for fertility, not breed for the sale barn. Breed for the hard month. Mabel had read those books every morning since Jonah's stroke. At first, she read them because missing him felt unbearable unless she could hear his thinking on the page. Later, she read them because the books were telling her something the county still refused to hear. The weather was changing the business model. Not all at once. That would have been easier to believe. It changed in increments small enough for proud men to dismiss. Longer hot spells, less cool at night, grass curing earlier, big cattle drinking more, heavy bulls losing recovery, feed bills rising just enough to explain away, then rising again. Travis Hale built his reputation during the years when those warnings still looked optional. Hale Crown beef had wide gates, new barns, shining trailers, and a breeding catalog that looked like a luxury magazine. Travis liked imported genetics, big frames, fast gains, and photographs where bulls stood broadside in perfect light, looking less like animals than monuments. He called it modern ranching. Others called it smart. The bank called it scalable. For a while, he looked right. His calves topped sale weights. His name appeared in regional livestock write-ups. Younger ranchers copied his bloodlines. Loan officers treated him like the local future. Red Lantern, by contrast, looked like an old answer nobody wanted anymore. Mabel's cattle were smaller, tougher-footed, plain-looking. Their calves did not win bragging contests. Their cows did not fill photographs impressively. Her fences leaned in places. Her chute squealed. Her truck had one door that only opened from the outside. Her son, Nolan, hated that. Nolan was 42, strong-shouldered, patient with animals, impatient with decline. He loved his mother, but love did not stop him from seeing the numbers. One evening in May, he came into the kitchen carrying a sale report from Hale Crown. "Mom," he said, dropping the paper onto the table, "Travis is getting 60 pounds more per calf." Mabel did not look up from Jonah's notebook. "How much hay did he buy to get it?" "That's not what buyers see. It's what debt sees." Nolan rubbed both hands over his face. Outside, the porch chain knocked softly against the post in a dry wind. "We can't keep pretending smaller is a plan." Mabel turned a page. Smaller isn't the plan. Then what is? She tapped Jonah's handwriting with one finger. Useful is the plan. That answer infuriated him, because it sounded simple enough to be stubborn. It also sounded like his father. Next week, a banker from High Plains Agricultural Credit drove out to Red Lantern in boots too clean for a working yard. His name was Graham Lyle. He had a careful smile and a leather folder thick with proposals. He sat at the kitchen table where Jonah had once sorted breeding records and explained in polished words that Red Lantern had options. Upgrade the herd, increase output, consolidate debt, position for growth. Mabel listened until he finished. Then she said, "You mean borrow money to buy cattle that need more money?" Graham blinked once. "That is one way of phrasing it." "It's the plain way." Nolan stood near the sink, jaw tight. He wanted to argue with her, but something about Graham's folder made him uneasy too. The banker leaned forward. "Mrs. Rourke, the operations that survive the next decade will be the efficient ones." Mabel nodded. "I agree." Graham looked relieved. Then she added, "We just don't mean the same thing by efficient." He frowned. Modern genetics convert feed faster. When there's feed. Market conditions are strong right now. Weather conditions aren't. Graham's smile thinned. You can't run a ranch as if disaster is always coming. Mabel looked through the kitchen window toward a pasture already turning pale in late spring. "Out here," she said, "disaster doesn't need to come all the way. It only needs to stay a little longer than your money." That was the end of the meeting. Graham left unconvinced. Nolan remained angry. And 3 days later, Mabel drove to the Jornada Flats livestock sale with Jonah's oldest notebook on the passenger seat. The sale barn looked like every bad decision in ranch country had been swept into one building and given a microphone. Heat hung beneath the metal roof. Dust drifted through the sunlight. Cattle bawled behind the gates. Men stood in clusters comparing weights, bloodlines, calves, loans, and whether they pretended not to fear. The first half of the sale belonged to the giants. A 2-year-old black bull out of Northern Performance stock brought $38,000. Another nearly broke 40. The crowd applauded each time a high bid landed. Travis Hale bought one with a neck thick as a fence post and turned around smiling like he had just purchased the future itself. Nolan sat beside Mabel with his arms crossed. "We're not here to buy one of those," she said. "I figured." "You sound ashamed." "I sound realistic." Mabel opened Jonah's notebook and began crossing off lot numbers. Too heavy. Too soft. Too feed-built. Poor foot angle. Breathing too fast. The more she wrote, the more Nolan felt the county looking at them. Then, Lot 42 stepped into the ring. No applause followed him. Cinder was 7 years old, pale red with smoke-gray shading along his shoulders, one ear torn at the edge, his right hip marked by an old scar that looked silver under the lights. He was not small exactly, but he was compact, assembled close to the ground, with clean feet and a deep chest that moved slowly. A man behind Nolan muttered, "Looks like he crawled out of a brush fire." Someone else laughed. The auctioneer glanced at his paper. "Older desert line bull here. Heat-tolerant background. Low-input operation. Proven pasture service." His voice carried the energy of a man reading a tax notice. The opening bid was low. Nobody moved. The price dropped. Still nobody. Hale leaned against the rail and smiled. "Somebody better buy 'em before the coyotes file a claim." The barn laughed. Mabel raised her card. Nolan's stomach fell. The auctioneer pointed quickly, grateful to have anything. "Got 1,700. Another rancher raised a hand, just to be funny. 18. Mabel lifted her card again. 19. The other man backed out, grinning. The auctioneer scanned the room. Travis called, "Mabel, you buying breeding stock or museum stock?" More laughter rolled through the barn. Mabel finally turned her head. Not much, just enough for Travis to see her face. "Funny thing about old blood," she said. It usually got old by staying alive. The laughter weakened. The gavel came down. Cinder was hers. On the drive home, Nolan stared out the window for nearly 30 miles before speaking. "You know what this looks like?" Mabel kept both hands on the wheel. "Yes. It looks like we can't afford real cattle." She nodded once. "That may help." He turned toward her. "Help? If people think we don't know what we're doing, they stop trying to sell us their mistakes." Nolan had no answer to that. At sunrise the next morning, Mabel turned Cinder into the west pasture and watched him work. That was the only word for it. He did not charge toward cows. He did not pace the fence. He did not waste motion performing dominance for nobody. He moved through the pasture slowly, sampling grass, testing shade, smelling water, lifting his head only when necessary. After 2 hours, the day had already turned hot. Several younger cattle had bunched near the windmill. Cinder kept moving along the slope where saltbush broke the sun. Mabel watched, with Jonah's notebook tucked under one arm. Nolan watched too, though he pretended not to. "He's not doing much," he said. "Exactly. What does that mean?" "It means he knows what effort costs." Within a week, Mabel made a second decision that traveled across the county faster than the auction joke. 12 of their biggest cows, Nolan met her at the loading pen, furious. "Those are the best-looking cows we have." Mabel latched the trailer chain. "No, they're the most expensive-looking cows we have. They throw heavy calves. They eat like rain is guaranteed. Everybody else is expanding. Everybody else borrowed money to expand." He kicked dust with one boot. "You are shrinking this ranch in front of everyone." Mabel stopped and looked at him. For the first time that morning, her voice hardened. "Your father and I did not keep this land through drought, debt, hail, and sickness, so we could go broke trying to impress people at a sale barn." Nolan looked away, because they were not dramatic. They were true. By late June, the heat settled in. At first, people called it a spell, then a pattern. Then, when the nights stopped cooling, they stopped naming it at all. The sky lost its depth and went white. Wind dragged heat instead of relief. The ground hardened until hoofprints looked stamped into fired clay. Water tanks dropped faster. Cattle stood longer in shade. Men who had joked in May began checking weather maps before coffee. At Hale Crown, the new bulls looked magnificent in photographs and miserable in pasture. They drank heavily. They moved less. One limped after crossing a baked draw. Another stood with his head low, foam at the mouth, sides working like bellows. Travis called the veterinarian twice in 1 week and blamed feed, transportation stress, mineral balance, anything but the possibility that the animals were exactly what he had paid for. Maximum output cattle, built for favorable conditions. Conditions that were no longer there. At Red Lantern, the heat hurt too. Mabel did not romanticize suffering. Grass still browned. Water still mattered. Shade still had to be managed. Cows still needed checking before daylight and after dark. But the herd behaved differently. They grazed early, rested deep, moved again when the sun dropped. Smaller cows held condition. Their calves stayed bright-eyed. Cinder traveled the rougher ground without swelling, without panic, without burning energy he could not replace. Nolan began noticing despite himself. The first real crack in his certainty came at the feed store. Harding's Supply usually rang with jokes, politics, and men explaining weather to one another as if clouds listened. That July, it sounded like a waiting room. 2 ranchers stood near the mineral tubs, talking low. "Had to haul water again. My big bull won't leave the tank. That says heat load." Then someone said, "Rourke cattle still look decent." The room shifted. Not loud, just enough. Travis, standing by the counter, snorted. Luck. But his voice did not carry the way it used to. Nolan heard that. So did everyone else. That night he found Mabel at the kitchen table, surrounded by Jonah's notebooks. The fan above them clicked once each rotation. Nolan picked up one book dated 11 years earlier. The page was marked in red pencil. Extended night heat will punish large frame cattle first. He turned another page. Do not trust spring weights if August fertility is the question. Another. Heat resilience is not a trait to add later. It is the base. Nolan read for a long time. Finally he said, Dad really thought this was coming. Mabel kept her eyes on the page. He watched it coming. Why didn't anybody listen? Because the old system was still paying. That sentence stayed with Nolan all night. The next morning, the first collapse made the county quiet. One of Travis Hale's high-dollar bulls went down near a muddy tank in the hottest part of the afternoon. Workers got him up, but the vet's report was worse than the fall. Severe heat stress, fertility damage likely, weeks of breeding compromised. By the time the news reached Harding Supply, the laughter from May felt very far away. Then 2 more ranches reported poor bull performance. Then early pregnancy checks began looking bad. Trucks became a normal sight on roads where nobody had budgeted for hauling water every day. Heat did not destroy the county all at once. It invoiced them steadily. A little more feed, a little more water, a little less grass, a few more open cows, a bull that did not cover, a calf sold early, a loan extension requested quietly. By August, pride had started to sweat through its shirt. The heat dome arrived like a lid pressed over a skillet. Even midnight felt unfinished. Cattle stood awake in the dark, searching for cool air that never arrived. Porch rails stayed warm after sunset. Pickup seats burned before sunrise. Men stopped saying, "It'll break next week," because next week kept coming back hotter. Dr. Lena Ortiz, one of the last large animal vets in the region, willing to run emergency calls from dawn to dark, saw the pattern before anyone wanted to say it. The biggest cattle were failing first. Not always, not perfectly. Ranching is not arithmetic. But the trend was too obvious to ignore. Heavy bulls needed more water. Large cows lost condition faster. High-input herds required rescue sooner. Conception rates dipped hardest where spring bragging rights had been strongest. Then Lena came to Red Lantern. She arrived early with dust on her truck and exhaustion under her eyes. Nolan met her at the corrals. Mabel stood by the chute holding Jonah's notebook. The work took most of the morning, one cow after another, record after record. By noon, Lena stopped writing and stared at her clipboard. Nolan felt his chest tighten. What? Lena looked past him toward the cattle. These numbers are holding. Is that good? She almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. It's more than good. It is unusual. Mabel did not smile. Lena flipped through the herd records again. Your conception loss is minimal. In this heat, with this grass, that should not be happening." Nolan looked toward the west pasture. Cinder stood under a strip of mesquite shade, head low, breathing slow. Lena followed his gaze. "That the old bull from Jornada?" Mabel nodded. Everyone laughed at him. Lena looked at the herd, then back at the clipboard. They should stop. By evening, the rumor had legs. Red Lantern held. Mabel's old bull worked. Rourke cows bred back. No one said it loudly at first. Loudness would have made too many people remember their own jokes. But the words moved through pickup windows, feed counters, vet calls, and bank offices. Graham Lyle returned to Red Lantern 2 days later. This time he did not arrive with growth proposals. He found Mabel and Nolan by the west fence, watching cows drift toward water. "I hear your pregnancy numbers are strong," he said. Mabel looked at him. "You hear fast." "People are concerned." "They should have been concerned in May." Graham ignored that. "There may be opportunities here. Breeding partnerships, replacement females, private contracts." Nolan understood before the banker finished. 6 months earlier, Red Lantern was a weak asset. Now it was a strategic opportunity. Mabel leaned both forearms on the fence. "You want us to sell tomorrow's cattle at yesterday's price." Graham's face tightened. "I'm saying you could improve cash flow." Nolan stepped forward. "We're not distressed inventory." The banker glanced at him, surprised. Nolan held his stare. "You came here last spring trying to talk us into debt so we could look like everybody else. Now everybody else is in trouble, and you want access to what Mom protected." For a moment, the only sound was hot wind clicking the fence wire. Mabel finally said, "Tell the bank Red Lantern isn't for sale." Graham left with less dust than he arrived with. By September, pregnancy checks turned private fear into public fact. Hale Crown had taken a brutal hit. Several pastures came back with open cow rates that made men stop talking mid-sentence. A ranch north of Tucumcari lost nearly half its expected calf crop. Smaller operators who had stretched themselves for bigger genetics discovered that high sale weights did not help when cows did not breed. Dr. Lena Ortiz presented the numbers at an emergency extension meeting. The county hall filled before 8 in the morning. The mood did not feel like a meeting. It felt like the moment before bad news at a hospital. Ranchers sat in folding chairs beneath buzzing lights. Bankers stood along the back wall. Feed suppliers avoided eye contact with men they had encouraged to scale up. Travis Hale took a seat near the aisle, arms folded, face gray with fatigue. Mabel sat near the front, with Nolan beside her. On the table ahead of them lay 3 of Jonah's weather books. That was the sight that changed the room before anyone spoke. because months earlier those notebooks had been old man clutter. Now they looked like evidence. Lena started with no flourish. This summer exposed a structural weakness in our breeding assumptions. The first slide showed temperature duration. The second showed water demand. The third showed conception rates by herd type. Murmurs rose. Large frame, high-input operations had suffered the steepest losses. Herds with heat-adapted genetics, smaller mature cow size, stronger feet, lower feed dependence, and proven dry country fertility had held better. Then Lena put up a photograph of red lantern calves born during the worst stretch of August heat. The room fell quiet. She picked up Jonah's notebook. Jonah Rourke documented this risk for years, she said. Heat recovery, night temperature, bull fertility, forage efficiency. He was not guessing. He was observing. The projector showed one of his old lines enlarged across the wall. The sale barn rewards the animal that looks best for one afternoon and rewards the one that works for 10 hard years. No one laughed. Travis stood. His chair scraped sharply. So you're saying all the modern programs are wrong? Lena faced him. No, I'm saying many of them were optimized for conditions that are becoming less reliable. That sounds like a polite way to say wrong. It is a precise way to say vulnerable. The room absorbed that. Vulnerable. Not foolish. Not evil. Not backward. Vulnerable. A man near the front raised his hand. What did Rourke do different? Lena turned toward Mabel. She should answer that. Every face shifted to the old woman in the faded work shirt. Mabel stood slowly. She did not enjoy the attention. That made people listen harder. Jonah said easy years lie, she began. No one moved. They tell you a cow is profitable because she looks heavy when grass is good. They tell you a bull is valuable because he wins a picture contest. They tell you debt is safe because the last few summers let you pay it. She rested one hand on the notebook. But hard years do the bookkeeping. A few men looked down. Mabel continued. My husband did not breed cattle to impress a buyer for 5 minutes. He bred cattle that could wake up on the worst morning of the year and still do their job. The room stayed silent of the year and still do their job. The room stayed silent. She looked toward Travis. Not with anger, but with a kind of tired mercy that embarrassed him more. Big cattle have their place. Good genetics have their place. But if an animal needs perfect conditions to stay useful, then out here, it is not efficient. It is expensive. The words landed harder than accusation, because they were practical. Travis spoke again, but his voice had lost its sharpness. What happens if summers keep doing this? Mabel looked toward the window, where dust slid past the glass. Survival stops being old-fashioned. That line traveled farther than any sale report that year. After the meeting, ranchers who once laughed came to Mabel quietly. Not all of them. Pride does not die in one morning. But enough. Walter Keene arrived first at Red Lantern before sunrise 2 days later. He had laughed at the auction. Nolan remembered. Mabel remembered too. Walter stood at the gate twisting his cap in both hands. "I came to look at your calves," he said. Mabel opened the gate. They rode through the herd in the pale light. Walter did not speak for nearly 20 minutes. He watched cows move across thin grass without crowding water. Calves nurse under mother's still carrying condition. He watched Cinder cross hard ground without limping, his old scar shining faintly as the sun rose. Finally, Walter said, "I thought Jonah was stuck in the past." Mabel looked ahead. A lot of people did. "I lost 39% conception." She nodded slowly. "There are losses you do not answer quickly. They need room." Walter swallowed. "I built the herd too big, too hungry, too dependent." Mabel turned her horse toward the shade line. Easy years taught a lot of folks the wrong lesson. By October, trucks came often. Some ranchers came openly. Others arrived early enough to pretend they had not. They asked about heifers, grazing, shade corridors, water spacing, bull selection, culling, frame size, recovery after heat, and the notebooks. Mabel helped more than Nolan expected. One evening, after the third visitor left, he asked her why. "They laughed at you." "Yes." "At Dad, too." "Yes." "Then why teach them?" Mabel stacked invoices beside the notebooks. "Because land punishes whole communities, not just proud men." Nolan leaned back, quiet. Outside, autumn wind moved through the yard, cooler at last. The heat dome had broken, but the damage was everywhere. Empty cows, strained loans, cattle sold early, confidence broken. Clay-colored dust still coated every gate. A few weeks later, Travis Hale drove out to Red Lantern at sunset. Nolan saw his truck and stiffened. Mabel only closed the notebook in front of her. Travis stepped out slowly. No audience, no grin, no polished speech. He removed his hat. "I owe you an apology," he said. Nolan almost answered for her, but Mabel lifted one hand. Travis looked toward Cinder, grazing near the west fence. "I thought intelligence looked like expansion. Catalogs, numbers, bigger cattle, bigger checks." He shook his head. "What I built only worked when the weather cooperated." Mabel waited. He looked back at her. "I mocked Jonah's cattle." For the first time, Pain crossed her face. He knew. That hurt Travis more than anger would have. He nodded. I suppose he did. Silence stretched between them. Then he asked quietly, Are you selling breeding rights? Nolan expected her to refuse. She did not. I will sell cattle, Mabel said, to people rebuilding for the right reason. Travis frowned. Meaning? Meaning, if you want a bigger photograph, go elsewhere. If you want cows that still work when August gets ugly, we can talk. Travis looked out across the pasture. For the first time in years, he smiled without performing. Fair enough. Over the next 5 years, Red Lantern Ranch changed without becoming something else. That mattered to Mabel. Turn Jonah's work into a factory. She did not flood the market. She did not let investors rename old wisdom with shiny language and strip out the discipline that made it work. Nolan became the guardian of that. He rebuilt the water system in smaller, smarter sections. He shifted grazing around heat recovery instead of convenience. He planted shade where cattle actually traveled. He kept detailed records, not because data looked modern, but because his father had taught them that attention was older than fashion. Agricultural students came from universities. Magazine writers came with cameras. Livestock conferences began using phrases Jonah never needed to sound important. Thermal resilience, low-input fertility, adaptive genetics. Mabel would hear those words and almost smile. Jonah had simply called it breeding cattle that could stand the bad month. Cinder became the kind of animal people pointed to long after they had stopped laughing. He never looked glamorous. Age deepened the lines around his eyes. His torn ear curled slightly. His old hip scar turned white. But his calves carried what mattered. Clean feet, calm movement, moderate frames, heat recovery, fertility that held when the country went cruel. One winter afternoon, Travis returned carrying a small envelope. Inside was the old sale tag from Jornada Flats, Lot 42. Mabel held it in both hands. Found it in a box from the office, Travis said. But it belonged here. She studied the faded number. Travis looked toward the cattle. You know what embarrasses me most? What? I thought wisdom should look expensive. Mabel folded the tag carefully. Most wisdom looks unimpressive until the bill comes due. He nodded. Weather taught me that. No, she said softly. Weather taught all of us. Cinder died the following spring beneath the West Ridge. Not dramatically, not violently. Just old. Nolan found him at daylight, lying where he could see the lower pasture. The old bull looked settled into the earth, as if the land had finally taken back what it had lent. Mabel stood beside him a long time. Nolan asked, You want him buried here? She nodded. He earned the view. They buried him under the ridge, above the pasture where his daughters grazed with calves at their sides. A year later, Harding County placed a bronze plaque at the extension grounds. Not for a politician, not for a banker, for Jonah and Mabel Rourke. The inscription read, "They bred for hard years and taught a county to listen before the land had to shout." People stopped to read it. Some remembered laughing. Some remembered losing. Some remembered learning. Mabel cared less about the plaque than about what happened afterward. Ranchers asked different questions now. Sale barns talked about recovery and water efficiency, not only weight. Young cattlemen measured value beyond a photograph. Even Nolan, once so eager to chase the future, learned that the future sometimes hides inside knowledge everybody else is calling outdated. One evening he stood with Mabel above the west pasture as his daughter June rode fence below them. She was 19, studying animal science, and already carried Jonah's habit of watching before speaking. Nolan smiled faintly. "I used to think Dad was afraid of modern ranching." Mabel looked across the land. Afraid of modern ranching. Then what was he afraid of? She watched June pause her horse near Cinder's Ridge, studying the cattle in the last orange light. He was afraid people would forget the land gets the final vote. Neither of them spoke after that. There are truths that deserve silence around them. The sunset spread copper across Red Lantern Ranch. Cows moved slowly through grass that had learned to return. Wind brushed the salt bush. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another hard summer was already waiting, because hard years always come back. But this time, more people were ready. Not because they had become smarter overnight. One old woman ignored laughter long enough to protect what worked. Because one forgotten bull carried the proof in his bones. And because the truth, once tested by heat, outlived every opinion that ever mocked it.